The strange thing about the iPhone 18 Pro rumors right now isn't what got added, it's what suddenly stopped feeling certain. For months, the smaller dynamic island basically felt locked in. The story was simple. Apple would use an under-display Face ID sensor, shrink the cutout, and give the iPhone 18 Pro and Pro Max one of those upgrades people notice in half a second. Now that story looks a lot less settled. A new rumor out of China from Digital Chat Station says the dynamic island on the iPhone 18 Pro and iPhone 18 Pro Max may stay exactly the same as it is on the iPhone 17 Pro models, with the move to an under-display Face ID array pushed back to the following generation. And that's where it gets interesting, because if that's true, this stops looking like a visual redesign story and starts looking like a priority story. According to that same report, the screen sizes and shapes would stay identical to the iPhone 17 Pro models, and the main upgrades would be the A20 Pro chip built on a 2 nanometer process, a variable aperture camera, and a battery increase including over 5,000 milliamp hours for the Pro Max. At first, that sounds a little underwhelming. No smaller dynamic island, same overall front, same shapes. But then you look at what is still being upgraded and the pattern shifts. What this tells me is that the rumored iPhone 18 Pro strategy may be leaning more toward efficiency, camera flexibility, and battery life than toward obvious front of phone drama. And if that sounds less exciting on a spec sheet, it may also be more deliberate than it looks. The article also floated a possible reason for that delay. Apple may want to keep pricing in line with the previous year, or at least avoid a major increase if RAM pricing rises broadly. In that context, a more expensive under-display Face ID system becomes one of the easier premium parts to postpone without changing the phone's core identity. That doesn't look accidental, not because the rumor proves it, it doesn't, but because the trade-off makes internal sense. Keep the profitable parts of the formula stable, upgrade the silicon, improve the camera, increase the battery, and avoid adding a costly component if it forces the pricing story in the wrong direction. And this is where the second report adds a really useful layer. Another leak, this time from Ice Universe, says the iPhone 18 Pro Max could measure 8.8 millimeters thick, up slightly from 8.75 millimeters on the iPhone 17 Pro Max. That is a tiny number on paper, the kind of change that sounds almost fake because it's so small. But then the weight rumor shows up right behind it. A previous report had already claimed that hardware changes could make the iPhone 18 Pro Max the heaviest iPhone yet. And last November, Instant Digital said the body would be slightly thicker than the iPhone 17 Pro Max, pushing the weight over 240 grams and making it the heaviest iPhone since the iPhone 14 Pro Max. What caught my attention was that these weight and thickness rumors line up almost perfectly with the battery rumors. Digital Chat Station has also said the iPhone 18 Pro Max could get a battery in the range of 5,100 to 5,200 milliamp hours, up from 5,088 milliamp hours in the eSIM version of the iPhone 17 Pro Max. So now, the thicker body doesn't just sound like a side effect, it starts to sound like the point. The clearer pattern here is that Apple may be willing to make the Pro Max slightly thicker and heavier if the return is better endurance. And strategically, that's a very different kind of upgrade from shrinking the dynamic island. One is visible in a thumbnail, the other is visible after a full day of use. That difference matters because the enthusiast conversation is always going to gravitate toward the cutout, the bezel, the front design, the thing you can circle in red on a leak render. But across these reports, the recurring upgrades are battery capacity, chip efficiency, camera behavior, modem changes, and display technology. That's a different center of gravity, and the display rumor might be the most revealing part of the whole stack. A separate report from ET News citing supply chain sources says Apple is planning advanced LTPO Plus OLED panels for the iPhone 18 Pro and iPhone 18 Pro Max. On its own, that already matters because those panels are described as more energy efficient. But then the report goes further. LTPO Plus would also allow Apple to move the IR scanner used for Face ID behind the display. And according to people familiar with the matter, Apple may also move the selfie camera under the screen without compromising quality. Now pause there for a second, because this is the part that changes the context. If one rumor says the smaller dynamic island is delayed, but another says Apple is preparing the display technology that would enable hidden Face ID and maybe even an under-display selfie camera, then the real story may not be that Apple abandoned the idea. It may be that the timing is the unstable part. I initially thought these rumors were directly canceling each other out, but they may actually be describing different stages of the same plan. The display technology is advancing, the supply chain is shifting, the hardware path exists, and yet the visible front-facing change may still miss this specific generation. That's a much more believable kind of contradiction, especially because the ET News report also says only LG and Samsung can produce these LTPO Plus OLED screens, which would push BOE out of Apple's supply chain for the Pro models, though BOE could still supply panels for the non-Pro versions. And suddenly this stops being just a design rumor. It becomes a supply chain story too. What this tells me is that the front design of the iPhone 18 Pro may depend not just on what Apple wants to do, but on which suppliers can actually support the display stack Apple wants at the Pro level. And when a rumored upgrade affects who gets to stay in the premium supply chain, delays start looking a lot less surprising. There's one more wrinkle. The thickness report also mentions another version of the iPhone 18 rumor list. A possibly smaller dynamic island, the C2 modem, a simplified camera control, and an upgraded main camera with a variable aperture. So even inside the broader rumor cycle, the smaller dynamic island still hasn't completely disappeared. It's just no longer the one thing everybody can safely treat as inevitable. That distinction matters more than it sounds, because for a while, the smaller dynamic island felt like the headline. Now it feels like the debate, and when the headline turns into the debate, the supporting upgrades become more important. Same 6.9-inch display on the Pro Max, possibly thicker body, possibly over 240 grams, a bigger battery, a 2-nanometer A20 Pro chip, a variable aperture camera, advanced LTPO Plus OLED, and maybe a C2 modem and simplified camera control, depending on which report ends up being right. That is not a small list, it's just a less theatrical one. One report also says the iPhone 18 Pro and Pro Max could be unveiled in September alongside Apple's foldable phone, or whatever name that product ends up getting, whether that's iPhone Fold or iPhone Ultra. And honestly, that timing makes the restraint angle even more notable. If these reports are accurate, Apple may not need the iPhone 18 Pro to win attention with one obvious visual trick. It may be enough to make the phone faster, more efficient, more flexible on camera, and meaningfully better on battery, while the more ambitious under-display story keeps moving in the background. That's why I don't think the most important part of these rumors is whether the dynamic island gets smaller this year. The more revealing part is that the rumored upgrades keep clustering around hidden performance, power efficiency, battery size, display tech, camera control, and component choices that users may feel before they notice. And if that's the direction, then the iPhone 18 Pro isn't shaping up like a phone that's trying to look radically new. It's shaping up like a phone that may be trying to get a lot of difficult things right before making the redesign obvious. That likely isn't random. See you next time. Peace.